The argument happened in the parking lot of Caldwell Financial Services on Mack Avenue in Detroit, Michigan, and it was not the first argument the Caldwell brothers had ever had, but it was the last one, and everyone who witnessed it that evening knew from the specific quality of the silence that followed it that something between these two men had just ended permanently. Leonard Caldwell was standing beside his car with his keys in his hand, and Raymond Caldwell was standing 10 feet away from him, with one hand raised pointing directly at his brother across the space between them, and Leonard was saying, "This is a business decision, Raymond. This is not personal." And Raymond was saying, "You restructured the ownership documents without telling me, Leonard. You changed the ownership structure of the business we built together without telling me, and you are standing there telling me, this is not personal." And Leonard said, "I told you it was for tax purposes." And Raymond said, "I had an accountant look at those documents." Leonard, "A different accountant, not ours, mine. Someone I hired specifically to tell me in plain language what those documents actually say." And Leonard went quiet for a moment, and his hand came up, palm outward toward Raymond in the specific gesture of someone who is trying to stop a conversation from going somewhere they do not want it to go. And Raymond watched his brother's hand go up and said, "Do not do that, Leonard. Do not manage me." And Leonard said, "Raymond, I am going to need you to trust me on this." And Raymond looked at his brother standing beside his car with his keys in his hand and his palm raised, and his expression doing the specific work of someone whose carefully maintained version of events is being dismantled in real time by the one person in the room who has the professional knowledge to dismantle it. And Raymond said, "I did trust you, Leonard." And he got in his car and drove away, and Leonard stood in that parking lot watching the taillights of his brother's car disappear around the corner, and the expression on Leonard's face in that moment was not the expression of a man who had just been caught. It was the expression of a man who had just decided that the timeline he had been working toward needed to be moved up before his brother had time to act on what he was beginning to understand. And what Leonard did not know standing in that parking lot watching his brother's taillights disappear was that the timeline his brother had been building quietly and without announcement for the previous 4 years was already complete, and had been complete for longer than Leonard's accelerated version of his own timeline could account for. Stay with me, because what happened in the 37 days between that parking lot conversation and the morning Raymond's key card stopped working and his bank access was blocked and his email was deactivated all at the same moment is one of the most precisely coordinated betrayals we have documented on this channel. And what happened in the 4 years before that parking lot conversation that Leonard did not know about is the reason the betrayal failed completely and permanently, and in ways that Leonard's attorneys spent 14 months trying to argue around without success. Subscribe to Psyche Tales TV right now if you have not already, because we tell the stories on this channel that nobody else is telling, and this community is growing every single day. Drop your location in the comments right now and tell us, if your business partner told you to trust him after you caught him changing the ownership documents of the business you built together, what would your very first move be? We read every single comment, and we want to hear from you before this story is over. Raymond Caldwell and Leonard Caldwell grew up in East English Village on the east side of Detroit in a narrow house on a street where everyone knew everyone, and where their mother Gloria had raised both of them after their father left when Raymond was 6 years old and Leonard was 10 years old. Gloria worked 2 jobs for most of their childhood: a daytime position at a Detroit insurance company processing claims, and an evening position at a dry cleaning business 3 blocks from the house, where she worked the counter and managed the books and learned, without anyone teaching her formally, how a small business operates from the inside when the person running it pays attention to every detail. She did all of this without complaint and without drama, and without ever allowing either of her sons to use the difficulty of their circumstances as an explanation for anything less than their full effort in every situation that required it. She was a woman who had developed over the course of raising 2 boys alone on the east side of Detroit the specific and invaluable talent for identifying exactly what a situation required and saying it clearly and at the right moment, and she applied this talent consistently throughout both of her sons' lives, with the result that both of them grew up understanding that their mother was not someone you could manage or redirect or outlast with patience, because she was more patient than either of them, and she saw more clearly than either of them, and she said what she saw without softening it for the comfort of the person hearing it. Raymond was the quieter of the 2 brothers from the very beginning, the one who sat with things before he spoke about them, The one whose teachers described year after year throughout his school years as the student who appears not to be paying attention and turns out to have been paying more attention than anyone else in the room. He had a natural precision that expressed itself most clearly when something was wrong. When a number did not add up, or a story did not match its details, or a situation presented a surface that did not align with what was underneath it, Raymond noticed it before anyone around him did, and he held what he noticed carefully and completely until he understood it fully before he said anything about it at all. He had always been this way, and it had always made him slightly difficult to read for people who were not used to the specific kind of intelligence that does not announce itself, and Raymond had spent his entire life surrounded by people who mistook his quietness for passivity and his patience for acceptance and his willingness to listen without immediately responding for agreement. This misreading of Raymond Caldwell was the most expensive mistake that anyone in his life ever made, and it was made most expensively by the person who had known him the longest and who therefore had the least excuse for making it. Raymond studied accounting at Wayne State University and graduated and got his certification and went to work at a mid-sized Detroit financial services firm where he spent 3 years learning the specific landscape of how small and medium businesses in Detroit manage their money and where they consistently lost it and what they needed that the firms currently serving them were not providing. Leonard was the one who could walk into any room in Detroit and walk out an hour later knowing everyone in it by name and having left each of them feeling that Leonard Caldwell was exactly the kind of person they wanted to know and wanted to do business with and wanted to introduce to other people they knew. He had a natural magnetism that Raymond had always recognized as a genuine gift rather than a performance because Raymond had known Leonard his entire life and could see the difference. Leonard had spent his 20s deploying this gift across every professional and social network available to him on Detroit's east side, and had built by the time Raymond came to him with the idea for Caldwell Financial Services a reputation that no amount of money could have purchased and a network of relationships that made the startup capital they needed accessible in ways that would not have been accessible to Raymond working alone. They were different men with different strengths who needed each other specifically and completely, and in the beginning both of them understood this without needing to say it, though they said it anyway, and the saying of it was true in the way that things are true. Before the thing they describe has been tested by circumstances that reveal whether the truth holds. The idea Raymond brought to Leonard on a Sunday afternoon in their mother's kitchen in East English Village in 2001 was not complicated, and that was its primary strength. He had watched the east side of Detroit for years and had understood something about it that the people who made decisions about his neighborhood consistently failed to understand, which was that there was an enormous concentration of small business owners in that part of the city who were all paying separately for the same set of services: bookkeeping, payroll processing, basic financial management and reporting, tax preparation, compliance documentation, each of them going to different providers at rates that were individually manageable and collectively significant, and none of them receiving the kind of integrated service that would have made their businesses more stable and their financial decisions better informed. What Raymond saw was that a single firm offering all of those services under one roof at rates that reflected the volume of clients they could serve simultaneously could be built quickly and could be profitable from a very early stage because the demand was already there in the neighborhood and the clients were already spending the money, and all that was required was to give them a better and more integrated and more neighborhood-specific place to spend it. Leonard listened to the entire pitch without interrupting, which was something Leonard only did when he was genuinely and completely interested, because Leonard was a man who talked when he was not interested and went quiet only when something had captured his full attention. And when Raymond finished, Leonard said 3 things in sequence. The first was that the idea was good. The second was that he could get the money. And the third was that they were going to do this together, and that together meant equal. Raymond said equal partners, and Leonard said equal partners, and their mother Gloria, who was standing at the kitchen counter making coffee, turned around and looked at both of her sons and said, "Get that in writing," and both of her sons laughed, and Leonard said, "Mama, we are brothers," and Gloria said the thing she always said when one of her sons offered a relationship as a substitute for documentation, which was, "I know what you are, get it in writing," and they sat down that afternoon and wrote a 2-page partnership agreement that said equal partners and described how profits would be distributed and how decisions would be made and how disputes between the partners would be handled, and they signed it in front of two witnesses, the first of whom was a neighbor from down the street, and the second of whom was Gloria herself, who picked up the pen and signed with the expression of a woman who knows that 2 pages is not enough and who is signing anyway, because 2 pages is what she has and 2 pages is going to have to do the work that 200 pages would do. Better, and the agreement went into a folder in Raymond's home filing cabinet in East English Village, where it sat untouched for 22 years. Caldwell Financial Services opened its first office in a leased space on East Warren Avenue in the spring of 2002, with Raymond handling the technical financial work and Leonard handling the client relationships and the community presence and the specific essential work of making the people of East Side Detroit feel that Caldwell Financial Services had been built for them specifically and understood their situation, specifically in a way that the larger downtown firms had never understood and were not particularly interested in understanding. The division of labor made complete sense because it reflected what each brother was actually capable of at the highest level, and in the first 3 years it worked in the way that things work when two people with genuinely complementary capabilities are both fully committed to the same goal and both understand that the goal requires both of them and that neither of them can achieve it alone. They grew from 12 clients in the first month to 94 clients by the end of the first year, and by the end of the second year, they had 160 clients, and by the end of the third year, they had 230 clients and had hired 4 employees and had moved from East Warren Avenue into a larger and more visible space on Mack Avenue and had built something that people in their community talked about with the specific warmth that communities reserve for businesses that feel like they were created to serve the community rather than to extract from it. Raymond was doing the work that made the business worth having, and Leonard was doing the work that made people want to have it, and together they were building something that neither of them could have built without the other, and the understanding between them in those early years was genuine, and the partnership was real in the ways that actually matter when you are building something from nothing with another person. Raymond worked long hours, and Leonard worked long hours, and the business rewarded both of them for working those long hours. And the reward felt like confirmation that the partnership was exactly what they had said it was in their mother's kitchen in 2001, equal and real and built on something that would last. Gloria came to the Mack Avenue opening and walked through the new office space slowly and carefully, the way she looked at everything, and said, "It is good," and Raymond said, "Thank you, Mama," and Gloria said, "I still think you needed more than 2 pages," and Leonard said, "Mama, the business is doing better than we projected," and Gloria said, "The business doing better than you projected and the partnership being documented correctly are 2 entirely different things, and one of them does not protect you when the other one stops being what you believe it is." Both of her sons heard this and processed it in their respective ways, which was that Leonard heard it and moved past it within approximately 30 seconds, and Raymond heard it and added it to the careful part of his mind where he kept the things he was not yet ready to act on, but that he understood might matter eventually. It was the kind of observation that only becomes fully meaningful in retrospect, and Raymond did not yet have the retrospect to make it fully meaningful, but he kept it anyway, because keeping things was something Raymond did automatically when his mother said them. The shift in the partnership did not arrive dramatically, and it did not arrive all at once. And this is the specific thing about the kind of betrayal Leonard was executing that makes it so difficult to respond to while it is happening, because each individual element of it arrives with an explanation that is reasonable on its own, and it is only when you look at all of the elements together over a long period of time that the pattern becomes visible and undeniable. In the 4th year, Leonard said he wanted to handle the banking relationships directly and exclusively, because having 2 points of contact with their financial institutions was creating confusion, and a single point of contact would make the firm appear more professionally organized. Raymond said that made sense and stepped back from the banking relationships and continued doing the technical financial work that was the actual foundation of everything the firm offered its clients. In the 5th year, Leonard said he wanted to handle the firm's legal matters through a single attorney relationship, because consistency in legal counsel was important for a business of their size, and switching between attorneys was creating unnecessary complexity in how the firm's legal affairs were managed. Raymond said that made sense too and stepped back from the legal relationships and continued doing the client work and the technical work and the operational work that kept the business running and growing and generating the revenue that made all of the other decisions possible. In the 6th year, Leonard brought Raymond a set of documents and said the firm's accountant had recommended a restructuring of the ownership structure for tax optimization purposes, and that it was routine for a business that had reached their size and stage of growth, and that it would not change anything material about how the business operated or how the profits were shared between them. Raymond read the documents carefully, and there were significant portions of them that he could not understand without specific legal and accounting knowledge that went beyond his general expertise, and he asked Leonard about those portions, and Leonard explained them in ways that were technically accurate in their specific details and practically designed to be reassuring rather than informative in their overall effect, and Raymond signed, because Leonard was his brother, and because the business was thriving, and because the specific and uncomfortable thought that his brother was using technical language to conceal something he did not want Raymond to see clearly was a thought that Raymond was not yet prepared to hold directly in his mind and examine without flinching. What Raymond did immediately after signing those restructuring documents was the decision that changed everything. He did not tell Leonard what he was doing, and he did not tell anyone at the firm what he was doing, and he did not announce it to anyone in his life except eventually to Gloria, and eventually to Walter, and he took the documents to a Detroit business attorney named Walter Briggs, who had been recommended to him by one of the firm's longest-standing clients, and he sat across from Walter in Walter's office and set the documents on the desk and said, "I need you to tell me in plain language what these documents actually say, not what I have been told they say, but what they actually say when someone who understands them completely reads them carefully." And Walter said, "I will need a week to review them properly," and Raymond said, "Take whatever time you need," and Walter reviewed them over the following week, and then called Raymond in, said, "Come in, I need to speak with you in person." And Raymond came in and sat down across from Walter, and Walter said, "These documents shift the formal ownership structure of your business in ways that reduce your documented claim on the firm's assets and increase your brother's documented claim, and the shift is significant." And Raymond said, "How significant?" And Walter said, "Significant enough that in a legal proceeding your brother's attorneys could use these documents to argue that your partnership interest in the firm is considerably smaller than what the original agreement describes." And Raymond sat with that for a long time before he said anything. And then he said, "Is it reversible?" And Walter said, "Not easily, and not without a legal proceeding, and potentially not completely." And Raymond said, "What do I do?" And Walter said, "Right now you do nothing. You let me understand the full legal landscape of what exists and what is possible within it, and what the original partnership agreement can do for you given what has been executed on top of it, and then we decide together what the right move is, and when the right time to make it arrives." And Raymond drove home from Walter's office that evening and sat in his car in his driveway for a long time before he went inside, and he thought about Gloria at the kitchen counter in 2001 saying, "Get it in writing," and he thought about the 2 pages in his filing cabinet, and he thought about whether 2 pages was going to be enough, and he did not have the answer yet, but he understood with complete clarity that finding out was now the most important work available to him. Raymond began keeping his own independent records of the firm's financial activities starting the month after he went to Walter, and he maintained those records for the next 18 months with the same meticulous and systematic attention he brought to his client work, because Raymond was an accountant, and keeping meticulous records was not something he did when it was convenient. It was something he did because it was the only way he knew how to understand a financial situation completely. He did not have direct access to the firm's bank accounts, which Leonard now controlled exclusively, but he had access to the clients and the billings and the service agreements and the operational costs and the payroll and the lease payments and the vendor relationships and every other element of the firm's financial activity that flowed through the work he did every day, and he was good enough at his profession to build from all of that information a picture of what the firm's finances should look like, and to compare that picture to what Leonard was telling him about how the firm was performing in their monthly partnership conversations. The gap between the picture Raymond was building from the available information and the picture Leonard was presenting in those conversations was not a small gap, and it was not a gap that could be explained by timing differences or accounting methodology differences or any of the other technical explanations that a person who was not an accountant might accept as sufficient. It was a gap that had one explanation and one explanation only, which was that money was moving out of Caldwell Financial Services in amounts and directions that the firm's actual client billings and operational costs did not account for. Raymond brought all of it to Walter after 18 months and set it on Walter's desk in organized folders and said, "Tell me what I am looking at." and Walter reviewed everything carefully over several days and then sat across from Raymond and said, "You are looking at a firm whose finances have been managed over an extended period in a way that has significantly and consistently benefited one partner at the expense of the other, and the documentation you have brought me supports that conclusion in ways that are going to be very difficult for the other side to argue around." Raymond said, "What do we do?" And Walter said, "We wait, and we continue to document everything we can document, and we build the foundation you are going to need when your brother makes his final move, and we make absolutely certain that when that final move comes, you are completely ready for it." Raymond said, "How long?" And Walter said, "I do not know exactly, but I believe it will come, and I believe you will recognize it when it does." Gloria called Raymond on a Sunday afternoon approximately 2 years into the preparation period and said, "Raymond, what is happening with the business?" And Raymond said, "Mama, everything is fine." And Gloria said, "Raymond, I have been your mother for 49 years, and I know the difference between you telling me everything is fine because everything is fine and you telling me everything is fine because you do not want to tell me what is actually happening." Raymond was quiet for a moment, and then he told her, not all of it, not the legal details that Walter had specifically told him to keep private and tell no one, but enough for Gloria to understand the general shape of what was happening between her two sons. And when he finished telling her, Gloria was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "I told you both to get it in writing." And Raymond said, "We did, Mama. We got some of it in writing." And Gloria said, 2 pages, Raymond." And Raymond said, "I know, Mama." And Gloria said, "Is 2 pages going to be enough?" And Raymond said, "Walter thinks it might be." And Gloria said, "Walter better be right." And Raymond said, "Yes, Mama, he better be." And they stayed on the phone for a while longer talking about other things the way they always did. When one of them had said the important thing and needed the conversation to continue past it into ordinary territory before they could end the call comfortably, and when Raymond eventually said good night and ended the call, he sat with his phone in his hand for a while and thought about his mother's voice saying Walter better be right, and understood that she was not expressing doubt in Walter. She was expressing the specific weight of a mother who has watched one of her sons spend 2 years preparing for a betrayal by the other, and who carries both of those sons in her at the same time. Leonard had been in negotiations for 6 months with a regional financial services company based in Ohio that had identified Caldwell Financial Services as an attractive acquisition target because of its established client base and its strong community reputation and its consistent financial performance over more than 2 decades. The Ohio company wanted to expand its Detroit market presence, and Caldwell Financial Services represented exactly the kind of established community-rooted business that would give them a genuine foothold in the East Side market that they could not have built from scratch in any reasonable time frame. Leonard had conducted these negotiations entirely without Raymond's knowledge and had represented himself throughout as the controlling owner of Caldwell Financial Services based on the ownership documentation that the restructuring had produced over the preceding years. He had presented the Ohio company's negotiating team with a clean and organized picture of the firm's ownership structure and financial performance, and the Ohio company's team had accepted what he presented because the documentation appeared to support it, and because Leonard was the kind of person whose presentation of information inspired confidence in people who were meeting him for the first time and who had no particular reason to look past the surface of what he was showing them. The acquisition agreement was finalized and signed on a Monday evening, and the following evening, Leonard coordinated the simultaneous deactivation of Raymond's key card access to the office building, Raymond's login credentials for the firm's bank accounts, and Raymond's access to the firm's internal communication systems. All 3 deactivations executed at the same time in a move designed to present Raymond with a situation that appeared complete and irreversible before Raymond had time to understand what had happened, let alone formulate a response to it. Leonard had calculated that the shock of the simultaneous loss of access to everything would give him the time he needed to complete the acquisition and present Raymond with a financial settlement based on the restructured ownership documentation rather than the original equal partnership agreement. What Leonard had not calculated into any version of this plan was Walter Briggs and the original 2-page partnership agreement sitting in Raymond's filing cabinet, and 18 months of meticulous independent financial records, and 4 years of quiet preparation that Raymond had been building since the afternoon Walter had told him the restructuring documents were significant and that he should do nothing yet and wait. Raymond arrived at the office building on Mack Avenue that morning and tried his key card at the front door, and it did not work, and he tried it a second time, and it did not work, and he took out his phone and tried to log into the firm's bank account, and the login failed. And he tried his email, and the email had been deactivated, and he stood on that Detroit sidewalk in the specific cold of a Michigan morning and understood from the simultaneity of all three failures that what he was looking at was not a technical error or a system malfunction, but a coordinated and deliberate action. And he stood there with his phone in his hand and his key card in his other hand, and he felt the specific involuntary physical response of someone whose preparation has just been confirmed as necessary and complete, and he smiled. Not the smile of someone who has just lost something. The smile of someone who has been ready for a long time and has just been shown that the time has arrived. He put his phone in his pocket and put the key card in his pocket and walked to his car and drove to Walter Briggs' office and sat down across from Walter and said it happened. And Walter said, "I know, I have been expecting your call." And Raymond said, "Is everything in place?" And Walter said, "Everything is exactly where you put it." And Walter filed the legal action the following morning, and by that afternoon the Ohio company's legal team was calling Leonard's attorneys with questions that Leonard had not anticipated receiving, because the legal action Raymond's attorneys had filed included the original 2-page partnership agreement and 18 months of independent financial records and a documented picture of the gap between what Leonard had been reporting to Raymond about the firm's financial performance and what the firm's actual financial performance showed. And the Ohio company's attorneys told Leonard's attorneys that the acquisition was potentially voidable if the ownership representation Leonard had made during negotiations was materially inaccurate, and that the acquisition funds were being held pending a complete review of the ownership documentation. Leonard called Raymond that evening, and Raymond answered on the second ring, and Leonard said, "We need to talk about this," and Raymond said, "I agree," and Leonard said, "You do not understand the full picture here," and Raymond said, "I think I understand it better than you expected me to," and Leonard said, "We can work this out between us," and Raymond said, "We are past that, Leonard, we have been past that for 4 years." And he ended the call and called Walter and told him Leonard had called, and Walter said, "Good. That means they understand what they are dealing with." And Raymond said, "What happens next?" And Walter said, "Now, we let the legal process do what it does, and we stay quiet, and we trust what we built." Subscribe to Psyche Tales TV right now, because this story is about to show you exactly what Leonard discovered when he found out what his brother had been building for 4 years. And you need to be here for this. Tell us in the comments. At what point in this story did you know that Raymond was going to be okay? Some of you knew the moment he smiled on that sidewalk. Tell us in the comments right now. The legal proceedings lasted 14 months, and they were not simple, and there were moments in those 14 months when Walter told Raymond that the outcome was not guaranteed, and that Leonard's attorneys were experienced and capable, and that the restructuring Leonard had executed over the years had created genuine legal complexity that had to be addressed carefully and methodically. Raymond listened to all of it without flinching and said, "What do we do next?" And Walter told him, and Raymond did the next thing, and then the thing after that. And they moved forward one careful step at a time with the same patient, methodical approach that Raymond had applied to everything his entire professional life. He drove to his mother's house in East English Village regularly during those 14 months and sat at the kitchen table where the whole thing had started, and Gloria made coffee and sat across from him, and they talked. Sometimes about the case, and sometimes about other things entirely, and sometimes about nothing that mattered in any particular way, and the talking itself was the point, because the kitchen table in East English Village was the place where Raymond understood most clearly what he was actually fighting for, which was not primarily the money, and not primarily the vindication, and not primarily the legal outcome, but the 2 pages, equal and partners. The document his mother had told both of her sons to write, and that one of them had written, and that the other had spent 20 years trying to make irrelevant. Leonard settled in month 14. The Ohio acquisition was restructured, and the original agreement was voided, and a new agreement was negotiated that reflected the actual ownership picture that the legal proceedings had established rather than the ownership picture Leonard had represented during the original negotiations. Raymond received his full equal share of the acquisition proceeds as established by the 2001 partnership agreement and supported by 22 years of documented contribution to the firm's growth, and Leonard received his equal share under the same calculation and significantly less overall than he had expected, because the restructured deal reflected what he actually owned rather than what he had tried to make it appear that he owned. Raymond signed the settlement documents and drove directly to his mother's house and sat at the kitchen table and told Gloria everything, and when he finished she was quiet for a long time. And then she said, "I told you both to get it in writing," and Raymond said, "You did, Mama," and Gloria said, "You got enough of it in writing," and Raymond said enough was enough, and Gloria picked up her coffee cup and looked at her son across the table where it had all started 23 years earlier, and said yes it was. Leonard left Detroit 8 months after the settlement and has not returned to the East Side business community in any professional capacity, and the Ohio company completed its integration of the Caldwell Financial Services client base under a new name, and Raymond received a 2-year consulting agreement to help transition the client relationships he had built over 22 years. When the consulting agreement ended, Raymond used the settlement proceeds and the consulting income to open a new firm in Detroit in his own name, with partnership documentation that Walter Briggs spent 3 months drafting to be as legally comprehensive and as protective of Raymond's interests as anything Walter had produced in 30 years of practice. Raymond told me that on the morning the new firm opened, he stood outside the entrance and looked at his name on the sign above the door and felt something he has described as the specific satisfaction of a thing being exactly what it says it is, his name, on a door leading to something that was completely his, documented and protected and not going anywhere, and not subject to the kind of quiet restructuring that happens over 20 years when the person doing the restructuring has convinced themselves that the person being restructured is not paying close enough attention. Raymond Caldwell had been paying attention from the first sign and had simply been deciding one careful, deliberate step at a time what to do with what he was seeing, and the decision he made on the afternoon, he took those restructuring documents to Walter Briggs and said, "Tell me in plain language what these actually say," was the decision that made every subsequent decision possible and every subsequent outcome available. Raymond Caldwell is 49 years old now, and his new firm has been operating for 3 years and has rebuilt a client base that reflects the same East Side Detroit community the original firm served for 22 years, and the same deep understanding of that community's specific financial needs and specific financial realities that Raymond brought to East Warren Avenue in the spring of 2002 when he and his brother opened the doors for the first time and believed completely that what they were building together was going to remain what they were building together. He told me that the thing he thinks about most when he allows himself to think about those 22 years is not the parking lot argument, and it is not the morning his key card stopped working, and it is not the 14 months of legal proceedings, and it is not the Friday afternoon he signed the settlement documents. The thing he thinks about most is the afternoon he sat across from Walter Briggs for the first time and said, "Tell me in plain language what these documents actually say," because that was the moment he decided to find out the truth regardless of what the truth was going to require of him. He also thinks about Gloria and about the Sunday afternoon in their mother's kitchen in 2001 when she said, "Get it in writing," and both of her sons laughed, and one of them got some of it in writing, and the sum turned out to be enough, 2 pages, equal and partners, written by 2 brothers on a Sunday afternoon, that said exactly what they meant and meant exactly what they said, and that sat in a filing cabinet for 22 years waiting for the morning they would be needed, and were exactly where Raymond had put them when that morning arrived. Here is what stays with me about Raymond Caldwell. Leonard spent 20 years building a legal structure designed to separate Raymond from what they had built together, and he built it carefully and with professional assistance, and executed the final step with the coordination of 3 simultaneous deactivations that he believed would present Raymond with a situation that was complete before Raymond had time to respond. What Leonard had not built into his plan at any point was the possibility that the brother he had watched step back from the banking and step back from the legal relationships and signed the restructuring documents without visible objection was not a brother who was failing to pay attention. He was a brother who had been paying the most careful attention available to him since the first sign that something was wrong, and who had spent 4 years building quietly and without announcement the foundation he was going to need when the final move came. Leonard had planned for a brother who would be completely caught off guard and who would be too shocked and too unprepared to respond effectively. He got a brother who smiled on a Detroit sidewalk because the deactivations confirmed that the preparation was right and that the time to use it had arrived. The smile was not performance, and it was not bravado, and it was not defiance. It was the specific involuntary expression of someone who has been ready for a long time and has just been shown that the readiness was exactly what the situation required, and that not a single day of the 4 years spent building it was wasted. So here's what I want to ask you before you go. The first question is about Gloria. She told both of her sons in 2001 to get it in writing, and both of them laughed, and one of them got some of it in writing, and the sum turned out to be enough. Do you think Raymond would have survived what Leonard did without that original 2-page document? Or do you think what he built with Walter over 4 years would have been sufficient on its own without those 2 pages? And the second question is about Leonard. He spent 22 years building something with his brother and then spent several more years systematically taking it. Do you think Leonard always intended to do what he did from the moment they agreed to build the business together? Or do you think something changed in him when the business became worth significantly more than either of them had expected, and the idea of having all of it, instead of half, became a thought he found he could not stop returning to? Drop your answers in the comments, because I genuinely want to know what you think, and this story is going to produce a comment conversation that runs for a very long time. If this story made you think about the partnerships and agreements in your own life, and whether they are as documented and as protected as they should be, share it with someone who needs to think about that question. Hit the like button if Raymond Caldwell reminded you of someone you know, and subscribe to Psyche Tales TV, because we are telling the stories that matter on this channel, and this community is growing every single day, and we are grateful for every single one of you who is here with us. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one.